So some stories I remember about Brian. One that I remember pretty vividly was when he was working for Shannon Ambulance, and he came to our house when I was little on an Easter, and I asked him if he could take my blood pressure, and he said, yeah, but let's put it around your neck. So he put the blood pressure cuff around my neck and pumped it up until I passed out. And my dad was not very happy about that.
There was one time we were at deer camp, we were sitting all around a fire, and Brian absconds to his tent for a short little while, comes back with this bag, and we're asking him, what is in that bag? And he looks back, and we see that there's a folding latrine in his tent, and he just takes the bag and drops it directly over the fire. Thought that was hilarious. I was like 7 years old, but it smelled awful. We were like, we're not going to cook anything on the fire. About 2-3 hours later, his brother Tom and Nick come back to the fire, immediately put hot dogs on a stick, and I'm about to say something, and my dad and Brian grab me and go, they're just briquettes now, not a word. I still don't know if they know that.
He accidentally caused the backdraft at Engine 8.
Tell that story.
He told me he was breaking out a back window on a house fire, and next thing he knew, he was across the street. And that the house came off the foundation, and Grant Orb and Geoff Smith
yes.
kind of got trapped inside.
I was at that fire. And that made a big.
And he took it just so matter of fact, got up, and kept going.
I was at training as a training paramedic, and Brian was in the bureau, and the chief had the training chief was Mike Mitchell, pretty high-strung guy, and Brian would come to training and always steal the door blocks, the door wedges, because it was against fire code. And so whenever he showed up for a class, he'd come in there and steal all the door wedges, which drove Mitchell nuts. And so Mitchell would call uptown, talk to Jensen, his boss. Hey, Brian's coming down here and stealing all the door wedges, because it was against fire code. So it was hilarious that Brian would stick it to Mike using the fire code, and Mike had no recourse.
I think my favorite memory of him would be whenever I would come to work, and I wouldn't have him on my run sheet for the day, so he wouldn't be technically mine for the day. So what would happen is somebody would go and get him up in the morning, and they would say, well, he wants you. He requests you, so he wants you to get him up. So every single time I'd get him up just because I know what he likes and did everything down to the line, and it was perfect. He was one of my really great friends, and I'm going to miss him a lot.
So we were all hunting a bunch of trunks, and I think we were deer hunting or elk hunting, I don't remember, in eastern Washington. Brian had a tent, and he had brought his own personal latrine with him that he could fold out with a toilet seat. And he went in the tent, it was getting dark, zipped it up, and he came back out, and all he has in his hand is a plastic bag, and it's tied in a perfect knot. And Hunter, I look at Hunter, this is like, no, that's wrong, Brian. And Brian takes the bag, we have a roaring fire, and he drops it in the center of the fire.
How did it smell?
That was Brian. And so we didn't roast hot dogs.
Why not?
But Hunter told me later on that Tom and Nick came back from hunting and they didn't realize it. They went over and roasted hot dogs. Anyway,
To this day, they don't know.
they don't know. Maybe they will now. Sorry, Tom.
So, my favorite memory of Brian is every time he sees me, he got a nickname for me. He calls me Mechalito, and it's so sweet. Every time I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. And then the other one, he has sung a song to me, and it was really beautiful. And we always laugh, share some jokes and everything. So I would miss him so much. He was a great person.
Karen Lemming. When I was commander of the Tacoma Fire Department Honor Guard back in the day, Brian had joined the Honor Guard, and he sang the national anthem at many events that we had. He had a beautiful voice, and we always appreciated his dedication and faithfulness to the Honor Guard.
So I'm Barry Johnson, and I taught Brian voice. He came to me as an adult, and was so very talented, and he worked his way up and started doing opera roles, professional, company, and I directed him in La Boheme for Tacoma Opera. That was one of his operas that he did, and he did Alcindoro and Benoit in that. And we were about a week away from opening, and Brian said to me and to the cast, I think that this is a wonderful production, but I think it's missing something. I think it misses a punch at the end. What if Mimi came in Act 4 and she was pregnant, and then she dies? It'd be like a double death. And we all looked at each other, the cast, and of course it was going to be my decision. And the cast said, I think that's a tremendous idea. And so I thought about it. I thought it was a pretty fun idea. Maybe we would even get CNN to come and cover, because it's very revolutionary. Leave it to Brian to come up with an idea like that. So we actually did it. And some people just were completely stunned in a good way. And some people were stunned in a bad way. And I think that kind of sums up Brian in a nutshell. He had some incredible ideas, the way that his mind would work, and some people loved it and some people didn't love it, and that was okay. It was okay with Brian.
I worked at the Bureau with Brian from 2004 to 2009, I think it said earlier. So Brian got on this huge health kick, which was odd because Brian was a huge smoker, as I think everybody full well knows. But anyway, Brian decided that to eat healthy, he ate everything raw. So that was eggs, that was his steaks. I think he soaked the steaks in something, and he would constantly berate the rest of us because we were eating at like Tacos Guimos, which is a highly recommended taco place on 38th Street or 38th Street Pho. But he would just badger us for the way we were eating, and he would sit there and he would, at lunchtime, would eat his uncooked rare steak that had been soaked in like vinegar or whatever. And then as soon as he was done eating that steak, he would go out and he would power down a cigarette.
And I was at the old 15s, and that was, so they were my medics when I first got hired and helped me teach. Went on all good calls there, and Brian and I hit it off at the beginning because I somehow somebody brought up that he sang, and then I sang, and he had sang barbershop way long ago, so we hit it off, talked about singing at the beginning. So that was our thing. We were both singers.
And I really brought back some memories too. They were talking about and the little tribute they did to Brian about how he suddenly just broke out.
Yeah.
And he would do that from time to time, and I was like, whoa.
Brian had his bike accident, and they called me to come to the hospital where he was. And he was in ICU or wherever he was, and he was kicking at the covers because he really didn't know where he was. And I remember his feet were so clean, and it just shocked me because I thought, Brian with these beautiful, clean feet. And now I will guide you over to those pictures over there because I want to tell you a story about a couple of those pictures. Brian was a very, very happy baby, and he loved his bath, so my mom said. And then this is my mother giving Brian a bath, and he was laughing because she was singing, and he just laughed out loud and almost spit on her, and she never sang again.
First, to everybody who showed up today, thank you so very much for honoring Brian. Thank you to the Tacoma Fire Department and all the retirees who showed up, shared stories. And I'm waiting to hear the stories that are naughty that nobody wanted to say today. Those are the funniest. I know who my dad was. To the family that came in from out of town, Nancy, thank you so very much, and Dan. And to my husband, who shared me and sacrificed much the last 4 years in allowing me to care for my dad in the way that I felt God called. Just everybody, thank you for coming. I don't know what more to say.
We're sent by the fire department to Houston, Texas, right after 9/11 to study terrorism and bombed and bomb making. And we also explored his former Coast Guard station, which he was able to break into because he still remembered the code to the door and the gate, which is exactly what Brian would know and do.
Brian and I came on together in the same class in the fire department in 1979. And my best story about Brian today is when he was on probation on a ladder truck. There's a certain day, you do certain things on certain days in the fire station. And it was a Saturday, and it was the day we did the floors. So he was brand new, it's like his first Saturday there, and the two guys that he was working with said, hey, let's pull a trick on the lieutenant. We'll go into the dorm and pretend we're asleep while he's out there washing the floors. So they went in there and they pretended they were asleep, except Brian actually fell asleep. And those other guys got up and sneaked out of the bedroom and began cleaning the floors. And the lieutenant says, hey, where's the probie? And so they said, well, I don't know. I think he's taking a nap. So, and he got pretty mad about that. So he went in there and there was Brian fast asleep on a bunk in the middle of the day, that was a taboo. And he got good reaming.
Brian was one of my patients, and he was a stubborn one. And I laugh because those are my favorite, because I got to win and make them like me. And I think in the end, I did that. I hope.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
We love you, Brian.
I was one of the broken birds that Brian rescued. Became like a Dutch uncle to my kids and I. And his way with words, like what Dale was talking about up there. There was one time my middle child, my oldest son, was doing the whole, in some cultures, I'd be considered a man by now, because I wouldn't let him do something or other he wanted to do. And this one time he was bending Brian's ear out in the backyard, and I heard Brian say, he says, well, let's think about this a minute. You got no cows, you got no women, you got no land. No, you wouldn't.
Well, Carl and Karina, I just wanted to give you my best and say sorry for your loss. I had so many adventures with Brian who helped facilitate all of that and also save us from them. I think of him fondly a lot as a second father, and I love you guys, and thanks.
I first met Brian. We were over at the hospital, and I walked in and I had a hat on and a surgical mask, and he looks up at me and he says, he says, you look like a coal miner. That's the story. So he calls me a coal miner every time I saw him.
So I just was thinking about how I met Brian, and it was on the shoulder of I-5 by the Tacoma Dome when there had been a crash, and that was back in 1990-91, and Brian was the paramedic with Tacoma Fire, and I had pulled over at the crash and I was giving CPR to the driver, and then Brian pulled up and our friendship was formed. And then after that, we just used to go to the opera and the ballet together and other mischief that we would get up to. He met my mom and her boyfriend at the time, and so they used to go on adventures together. And sometimes Brian would call my mom and be like, hey, do you want to go for coffee? And my mom would be like, yeah, sure. So they would go, and they'd leave about 11, and then they'd come home at 11.
What am I to say that I haven't said? Well, I actually cut out so many stories. And even as I was speaking, I cut a few out because I was worried about time. But let us keep telling the stories and keep remembering Brian.
I had started putting together a retirement party for Brian when he retired out of the Prevention Bureau. And I worked with him from 2004 to 2009 when he retired. And so when I found this, and it was an incomplete document, but we'd spent some time crafting the words for it, and I think the words in this retirement document, which is normally passed out, one of these goes to all the fire stations to collect money for the retiree, and then it also says when the party's going to be. And so I'm just going to kind of read it to you, if that's okay. So it starts out with a "you decide," and it says, "World's smartest man, artifice intelligence, master of thaumaturgy, the always popular alien being theory, or possibly all of these. You're supposed to decide which one described Brian the best. If you want a definition of artifice is cunning or crafty intelligence. Thaumaturgy, which I had to look up, is the performance of miracles, specifically magic. So it goes on to say, for a deep discussion or just some light conversation with the last Renaissance man, join us at Katy Downs. We hadn't picked a date at that point in time, as we help in celebrating the end of this chapter in his grand adventure while making the start of the next one befitted of, and then the blank, it was left blank so you could put in whichever you felt best described Brian. It finished off by saying, don't forget large denominations are encouraged as intelligence doesn't come cheap. And so anyway, the final part of this was a blurb and a saying that Brian always said, and it was, if it wasn't for the tea, we'd all be in a coma.
Okay, and to you, Dad, I want to say that I love you so very much. One of the last times that I said, Daddy, do you know how much I love you? You said, about 114 pounds. That's what you thought my weight was. You're about 15 pounds off, but anyhow, Daddy, I do hope that you were looking down and seeing all your friends and family gathered to honor you, and that Barry, your favorite voice coach of all times, sang to you. The songs were picked for you, Dad. We love you, and we adore you, and we miss you, and I pray that you are singing with the angels, as we would say every evening, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, in Jesus' holy and precious name we pray. Amen.